Well, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon and good evening. Thank you so much for dropping by. And thank you so much for the wonderful super chat. Surprise donation biscuit. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. Wonderful to see you all. Yes, I thought I'd shake things up a little bit with the Saturday slots because I'm getting a lot of questions about kind of DAZ related and 3D related topics. And I thought there's always this time constraint that I have during the week to sit down and make a video and go and edit it. It is actually much faster and easier and much more fun for me to do these things just live. And then rather than having them buried in a longer stream, I can then go and take a bit out, which reminds me, I should really press the record button so that I can, record the stream, which appears to have some issues here. So let me just go quickly fix that while I talk about the plan that I have. So on the Saturdays, I was thinking it'll be good for me to talk about some of the 3D things and just have them, why can't I record this? Crazy stuff. Must be some location thing that OBS doesn't want me to record the stream. So I thought, I'll do that, and then I'll go ahead and can't really record my stream anymore. Crazy. I'll find a way. It's okay. It's okay. So I'll then find a way to turn these into shorter videos that are more on topic. So the three things that I was going to talk about today are not only the funky new YouTube features that we have, we'll come to that in a moment. There is some magic called keyed properties, and that is something I've discovered more or less by fluke, and I've talked about this in a recent Patreon post. It's something that lets you add kind of multiple, multiple deformations onto a single slider in DAZ Studio. So that's very new for me, and I've just discovered it. I happened upon it by fluke. So key properties, that's something that lets you have, say, 5 or 6 expressions on one slider, and you make the slider and you can then go and interpolate between all these all these expressions or full body morphs or poses. So it makes our life a lot easier without having to use the timeline or Puppeteer. Those things are still available, but we can basically combine those features into a single slider. Super exciting. I'm looking forward to that. Then there's a question I got about DAZ 3D licensing. What can you actually do with the images? So I'd like to answer that. And then I've made a video that released earlier this week that was very successful. It was about how one person can sit on a couch and then go and deform the object underneath him or her, and that is something that was well received, and many people had questions in regards to how am I going to go and go about this and put multiple people on the couch. So those are the things that I'd like to answer, and then if time permits, we can either answer more questions or we can play Subnautica. Either way, I'm open with it. So that's my plan going forward, having the Saturday slot turn that into like a mini 3D slot, and then that's the plan. I suppose we're going to start with that. Oh yeah, and that's also Bokeh. That's another very exciting thing. Bokeh is something I've played around with this literally just before we went on air. This is something I've been meaning to do with DAZ Studio for a while. Let me just show you the tentative effect here. If I go and switch this over to my iRay viewport, let's see what it looks like. That's what it looks like. So imagine instead of a cone, imagine we had a person, and imagine instead of the default lighting, we had really good lighting. And that is what you can do in DAZ Studio without actually resorting to external tools other than ultra scatter. So I might try that out with a person as well. So very, very interesting stuff. So first of all, let's go and let me answer the question about multiple people on a couch. So I've explained in a previous video how you can sit one person on one cube, and let me see if I can find that file. So I don't have to recreate it from scratch. I can just go and add a second person to it. And that is under dual seat. There we go, dual seat, exactly. I think that is a scene I've prepared for this. So with one person, I've explained that you have an object like a couch, or in my case a cube, and you add a subdivision smoothing modifier to the underlying seat object, yes, you add a subdivision smoothing modifier to the seat object, and then you go and sit the person down, and they then dig into the seat. That is what I've explained in the video, and that's a great concept if you have one person and you have one subdivision surface modifier. But if you had two people, I mean, I've made it happen here, and I'll show you how it works. But if you have two people, that's not quite as easy. So let me go and get rid of this, and also get rid of the female figure first, and stick with the male figure for now, and see how this magic is being made possible. So if I had one person and I had one subdivision smoothing modifier on my chair object here, then I would go ahead and head over to edit, actually, object geometry, and I'll just go and quickly remove my subdivision surface modifier from this. So in an ideal world, if I was going to make him sit in here, what I do is, with my cube object or my seat object selected, let's go ahead and head over to edit, object geometry, add smoothing modifier. That's the first thing we need to do, and that is something that'll create a property on our object that's then accessible in parameters under mesh smoothing. Here it is, and that has some settings and a collision item. So if I go and set that to my person, in this case the Genesis 8 male, then watch what happens with the seat object. It deforms, and that's very, very cool. And if I go and crank this up to 20, it'll look even cooler. And now I can go ahead and take my man here and go move him around. If I want to move him to the edge of the seat, this is gonna happen magically, and it's all great, and people are loving it, which is good. I like that this can make our scenes more realistic. But the problem, of course, arises with what might happen if I had a second person, because if I make my Genesis 2 female visible, I can still see the indentation of the man here, but the female doesn't have one, and it doesn't look good. And the problem is that on my cube object, on my mesh smoothing object, I can only select either the male or the female person. So if I select her now, then the indentation will be under her derrière, but not underneath his anymore. And that's not good, is it? Because we want for that to happen with both characters. And there's currently no way in DAZ Studio to tell it, hey, just use both or use a group. So that's another possibility. I have a people group in which both characters are, so I can go and make both of them invisible. So that's kind of convenient. So I could, logic dictates, try and make the collision item the actual people group. And when I do that, however, nothing happens, because the group itself doesn't have the necessary geometry. It's just a holder object that doesn't have any geometry itself that could collide with something else. So what can we do? We can either split the seat object into two pieces and then hide half on one, hide half on the other, and then apply two smoothing modifiers. That is one option, but it's a bit of a stretch. So it's difficult to do that. A much easier way to do it is to export my people. So I'll go and hide my cube and essentially everything else that's in the scene, and grab my people, export them as an OBJ, and then import the OBJ again and use that as a proxy object to create both indentations. So you can leave the people as they are with clothing and everything. Just make sure everything else is hidden in the scene, and then head over to File, Export, and export both these two people objects. So I've got one object already. I might oversave it in a moment. I might just oversave it now. Just say yes, that's fine. Every time you move the people, you have to export this again as well. Just pick the DAZ Studio preset, that'll be fine. Hit accept, and that is that. Now, depending on the amount of clothing items and the amount of subdivision what's it called here, the subdim modifier, depending on how that's set, that might be quite heavy in regards to geometry. So I recommend, since we only really need a proxy object there, turn everything that you're about to export into low resolution before you do that. So I'll show you the comparison in file size there. The way you do that is by selecting each person and heading over to mesh resolution, and then set this, that's on the parameters tab, set this from high resolution to base resolution on every object in your scene, because that literally just gets rid of so many polygons that you really don't need to create that indentation. Even better, you can, indeed it is, isn't it, Biscuits? Absolutely. Even better, there is a product by 3D Universe that I use all the time that is called Scene Tools, and it comes as 3 parts. And the first one, Scene Tools Set 1, has a little thing that adds itself up to the toolbar here. That's this button, and what that does is literally go through every item in your scene and sets everything to low resolution, and vice versa back to high resolution. So if I were to click this button now, regardless of what's selected in my scene, all of my objects, which is just 2 people, are being turned into base resolution. But it also does that with other things. So like my cube is also no longer smooth. It is now a kind of a sharp-edged cube. So that is now all base resolution. And now if you export them, I'll just hide the cube again, say export, and I'll say 2 people low res, keep everything as it is, and let's go and compare the 2 file sizes here, because it is dramatic, the amount of the file size. Dual seat. Here it is in OBJs. So we have the 2 people. This one here is 5 megabytes. That's the low res version, and the high res version is already 21 megabytes. So that's a significant difference. It's basically 4 times the size. And I'm using regular Genesis people for that. I'm not using the 8.1. The 8.1 people for that. You're probably wondering why how do I know the file sizes? They show up down here. 21 megabytes on 2 people, and then 2 people low res, that's 5 megabytes. So it's a fourth of the file size. So if you have a Genesis 8.1 figure, that subdivision surface modifier is set to 2, so you're probably going to have this to the power of 8. And if you had clothing items, that's just going to increase the whole amount of geometry there to a certain amount. So what we're going to do now is import my low-res proxy object again. So that's under File, Import, and I'll bring in 2 people low-res, and that's going to look a little crazy. I'll just pick the DAZ Studio preset as well. Hit accept, and this may look a little crazy, creepy. So if I go and make my 2 people invisible, it looks like 2 people are still there. And of course, we don't really want to do that. So I'll just move them out of the way here a little bit. Oop. Just to prove a point, there are now more people in here than there should be. It looks creepy. And I'm glad you spotted the crab already. Yes, that is something I've been building that on my Twitch channel during the week. I thought this project was going to take a lot longer than it did. So now the crab's going. It's very nice. Yes, and I've put him in so that every 5 minutes he goes and walks through my overlay. I hope you like him. Oh, does he? Oh, thank you for letting me know, Julia. Maybe I've got a wrong file there. Let's see if it's let's see if I can correct it. So I've got my 2 people here. I'm going to go and disable, or just make the 2 people low res. I might call that just a proxy object, just so that I remember what that is. I can make them invisible, and then turn everything back into high res. That's with the little Scene Tools icon. So if you look closely at my friend, the male figure here, he looks a bit chunky on the ears now. And if I go and click that little icon now, it takes a second, depends on how many objects are in your scene. Everything goes back to high res, which is nice, except for my proxy object, the low res people, because they don't have a subdivision surface modifier. So I'll go make the cube visible again, and with my cube selected, I'll go back to my parameters tab to mesh smoothing, And then instead of the people group, which didn't work, I'm going to go and let him collide with the two people low-res proxy object. And as soon as I do that, that OBJ creates the indentation. And now both people can sit on the chair rather comfortably and create the indentation. Haha! Another mystery solved. So the only issue with that approach is that when you go and say, maybe I'd like to move my female figure, my second figure here, over to the right a little bit, she moves, but the indentation doesn't. So as you make that change, you have to go and once you have the final position of both figures sorted out, you're going to have to go and export them again and bring in that low-res proxy object again, just so that you know, you can you get the proper indentations. So that is that. Two people or multiple people. You can do it with as many people as you like. So you can have like 3, 6, 10, 20 people if your graphic card can render that. So there we go. That's the two people on one object. I thought that's the easiest way to get that done. Mr. Jeremy, top of the morning, sir. Good to see you. Jamie was there when we made the crab. That only took me 2 days with a third day to put him together, to render him out. I'm going to make that available as a little YouTube series as well. So that is coming up. There's about 8 or 10 videos in total, just little snippets of how I've animated the crab, how I literally put everything, animated every item of the crab, then turn everything into anti-blocks and then layer that whole thing. So it's a good series. It's coming up. Let's see. This is what we've done. Licensing. Let's talk about DAZ Studio licensing. That is another thing that is that The Alchemist was asking about. The Alchemist was watching the recent DAZ stream as well as many of my videos. Thank you for tuning in, Alchemist. So he says, what can I actually do with DAZ Studio figures output? So whatever I do with DAZ Studio, what's the licensing agreement? What is it that I can do with the output? Can I use it commercially? And you know, what's the lowdown, Jay? Tell me. And the best thing I can suggest for that is you head over to the DAZ 3D website and then scroll to the very bottom, at the very bottom. And you see this thing here, which is called the licensing agreement. And that has a lot of words in it. And I suggest you read it carefully because I'm not a lawyer, but I can give you my interpretation of it. It has 3 parts to it, the end user license agreement. And before you even create an account on the DAZ 3D website, before you even download anything, even free content, you have to agree to any of these terms. So that's important to know. So you must be logged in to sign the license agreement. And once you've signed it, you can then go and purchase items or get free items and then use them in your work. So you have there's 3 parts to this license agreement. So the first one is the general license agreement. We're going to go through that. Then the second one is the academic addendum. We don't really worry about that so much, but the third one is interesting, which is the interactive license addendum. So it's been through a few iterations. Oh, there's also the forum and gallery submissions addendum. So that's another part, but that is just so that you can use the service as I understand it. So disclaimer, I'm not a lawyer. What I'm telling you might be completely wrong, but this is what I live by, and it kind of, you know, it works for me. There's even a 5th one for commercial 3D print add-on license. So there we go. So essentially what this first part here says, this general license agreement, it says that you can install DAZ Studio as well as the content on an unlimited number of computers to work with. So you on your own computer. So if you have 3 systems or 5 systems or 10 systems, you can go and install all the content that you own, that you bought from the DAZ store, on all these computers. It's perfectly legal. You can do that. You can also let them render at all these at the same time simultaneously if you want to do that. You can do that too. And most importantly, what the Alchemist and many other users are probably interested in, anything that you render out of DAZ Studio, anything that's a 2D picture that comes out of DAZ Studio, you can use commercially. You can give it away for free. You can make money with it. You can create book covers, visual novels with it. Doesn't matter what you want to do. You can sell it for vast amounts of money. Anything that's a render that comes out of DAZ Studio in any shape or form, if it's a 2D picture, you can use. And for that, that's the regular license. So if you put a product in your shopping cart with no interactive license on top of it, you can do that. Once you buy it, you can go and render it out in any shape or form, and the 2D output of that product, of that scene that you create, is all yours to keep. So that's as simple as that. This means still images as well as walking crab images. So I can go and sell this crab now, the animation that I've made, the still image that I've made, and sell it commercially and keep 100% of the profits. That's what that means, and it's perfectly legal to do that. So an animation is just a series of 2D images. That's why an animation is just as possible as one still image. So that's what you can do. What you cannot do is resell the content as is. So if you download something, let's say a custom figure that you've made, that somebody's made, you download that, you can amend it in DAZ Studio. You can do all kinds of things with it. You can take it to Blender, and anything that's a 2D render that comes out of the other end, perfectly legal to use. What you cannot do is take the 3D geometry, modify it, or leave it as is, and then sell that as a 3D thing. That you cannot do. You cannot use anything that is the 3D object in a product that you buy. You can't do that. You can use it, which is why the third amendment comes in here, the interactive license addendum. Some products, or most products actually on the store that you see, they have a tick box that says add an interactive license to it. Let me just go see if I can find one just randomly. Picking the first product of this one, the Kiko 8.1 Warrior Bundle. You've got this thing here, which is the interactive license. If you buy this product for $119.95, you can use any 2D output you create. If you add the interactive license to this on top of it, so you need to own the product and the interactive license, then you can use content from this product in something that will use the 3D geometry. So you can't give it away as is, or as a rigged figure made for, I don't know, Cinema 4D or for Blender. You can't do that, but you can give the 3D geometry away if you have the interactive license for things that you make in Unreal Engine or Unity or any other 3D interactive presentation. So programs that need the 3D geometry to operate, so that the user can basically go and have a camera pan around the whole 3D object, or look at it from all sides, like VR avatars or whatever you want to build with it, video games or interactive 3D presentations. For the Unity or the Unreal Engine or whatever engine you use will need the 3D geometry to present the user with the relevant data on their 2D screen. So if you have the interactive license, you can include those types of products in your build project. So that means you can build the project, and it'll be kind of a binary that people can execute, but people can't extract the 3D geometry from it as if it were a 3D product. So the point is, you can't take this product and go and sell it on Renderosity or on your Ko-fi store. You can't do that, but you can include it with the interactive license. You can include the 3D geometry in things that will need it to display their own content, like video games or other interactive presentations. That's what that license agreement says, but don't take my word for it. Disclaimer, do not take my word for this. This is how I see it. This is what I read into it. Once again, if you want to read this yourself, you would have already agreed to this license agreement before you started downloading products. But if you want to see where that is, go to the front page of DAZ 3D, DAZ3D.com, and then at the very bottom of the page, you see the licensing agreement. Read it carefully, and that will answer most of your questions. I hope that made it clear, Alchemist. I hope you got a lot out of this, and you know, I wish you all the best of success with all your 2D and interactive 3D projects. Mr. Chris, wonderful to see you. Also, Christina, I didn't say hello. Good morning, Christina, or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. That's licensing. Multiple people on a couch. Let's talk about something equally exciting, which is called keyed properties. Oh my, that was just so beautiful when I found out what that was all about. I think I've shared my findings on Discord. Let me just go and briefly bring that up because it's just such a nice thing to see. So key properties, I was exploring controllers in DAZ Studio, and I'll explain more about controllers in my animated crab video. Controllers are magical properties as well. They essentially allow you to use a single slider and make that one slider do multiple things at once in your here it is, in your, what's the word, project. There we go. So this is how this works. So I've been playing around with controllers, and this is what came out. So this is a single slider that can make multiple expressions. As I move the slider, and I've made this myself, so I'll show you in a minute how to do that as well. As I move the slider, it goes through various properties on the figure. So these are all expressions, I believe, from the Fred Rise to Fame bundle. They come with that, and I've added them to a single slider. So it's almost like I had a mini timeline in my slider there. And it doesn't just work with expressions, it also works with full body poses. And when I discovered that, I thought, my goodness, this just reminds me of what the Pose Architect products and the Zevo growing up morphs, what they look like. Because they make that happen. They essentially have one slider, and you morph the Genesis figure from a little boy or little girl to an elderly lady and a grown-up in between. So this is what 3D Universe does with the Toon Generation figure as well. You have one slider that turns the whole Genesis figure from a toddler into an adult and into an old man, and it just goes through these stages. And I was always wondering, how do these people do it? And I believe keyed properties is how this works, and it is fairly simple once you know what to click and where to go. And let me show you how it works. Yes, keyed properties, my goodness. And it's just so refreshing when you find something that that you've not known before. You think, oh my god, it's like magic. I believe Brian said, you said it was wizardry. So let's go and let's do this with expressions. Let me show you this with expressions. So I'll go and grab myself a Genesis, just a gray Genesis figure for now. So I can recreate exactly what I've done there. I'll use the Genesis 8 male. I wish I've used the 8.1 male. I'm sure we'll find expressions for him. So here he is. Let's go and zoom into his face so we can see what his expressions are going to look like. And I don't know if I have expressions. I'll just dial some in. I think I'll just dial some in. So in the head we have expressions, and I'll just go and pick a few, like maybe afraid and angry. I mean, they're not fantastic, but you'll get the point. In order to mix and match between them, I can either dial these sliders up for any given situation, but sometimes I like a combination of two things. So maybe afraid and angry together makes me the better morph combination rather than just using one of them. And if you're making a lot of renders in the same scene, like for a comic or for a visual novel, you need to have quick access to a multitude of expressions quickly. And I've showed you recently how to do this with Puppeteer. So that's another very, very cool way of doing it. You just go and add these little dots around it. I'll just show you again. If you go and add an empty dot here, and you go and crank up this expression, put another dot here, and then zero this one out, and then add the angry expression, and put that dot here. And then the moment you switch this over to preview, you can go and interpolate between these expressions. And you can do that with as many expressions as you like. I always recommend you have one neutral dot in your Puppeteer preset. So essentially what it's doing is, as I move my little crosshair, it'll interpolate between these values. And that's kind of cool. But that's one way to do it, and it takes some time to set up. Let me go and delete all these pose presets here. Just right click and hit delete. Set these guys back to 0, and we're not using Puppeteer for that. Instead, we're using these keyed properties now. So if you go and open your regular timeline at the bottom, what I've just shown you with the puppeteer is very similar to what the timeline does with interpolated values. So if I have one keyframe, I have 30 frames on my timeline as it is. I'll set one keyframe with a 0 expression here, and maybe I have another one, say on frame 5, I'll crank this up to afraid. So now I go and interpolate between these. This is essentially what the puppeteer tool did as well. And just in case you're not familiar with timeline, what it does is it'll interpolate values over time. And so at this frame, it'll have whatever's dialed in now. At this frame, it'll have whatever's dialed in now. If I go to frame 10, I can go and set this back to 0 and maybe add angry to my expression timeline here. And then it'll interpolate from here and then over to here. That's how I'll do it. I'm going to go and add a few more expressions here. So angry, I'll set that to 0 on frame 15 and maybe say, I don't know, confident. Is that good? Yeah, that's subtle. Contempt, maybe. Yeah, it's okay. It's good. Contempt and disgust at the same time. That's a good expression. Goody. And then on frame 20, I'll just use a couple more. I'll set this to 0. I'll set this to 0. And maybe on frame 20, we'll go with excitement. By the way, if you're interested in, oh, this is a bit strong here, isn't it? I got to make sure that this here is also set to 0, because otherwise those expressions are a little bit overkill. Yeah, sometimes it's a bit of an issue when expression values go a little overboard. We want to be on 0 here, and maybe 25 is probably enough for this demo. So my timeline does this, and it's almost like what I want my slider to do. So that's, you know, that's number one. That's kind of number one part of the puzzle. So number two is, how do we turn my timeline into a slider like that, like what I've shown you? So, you know, looks like he's going to swear. Absolutely. Pugwash, welcome. Good to see you. That is exactly what he looks like. So I'll go, and you can put this anywhere you like. You can put it under pose controls. I might just go and put it in the top, somewhere in the top. Maybe pose controls, is that a good idea? There's so much in here already. I might just go put it in my pose controls at the very bottom here, so just that it's inside pose controls. So first thing I need to do is put the whole parameters tab into edit mode. I think that's how it works. Somehow edit mode, there we go. So right click anywhere here and turn this whole thing into edit mode. And then at the bottom here somewhere, there should be an empty space here somewhere. If it isn't, I think this might also work. Right click on this basically anywhere where it's gray and empty. Once it's in edit mode, right click on here and select create a new property, and that'll create ourselves that new slider that we want to make. So let's go and make that happen. Create a new property. It'll come up with another dialog that'll first of all ask us what property type is it. Float's good. What name would you like to use? This name and label. So there, if you ever distribute these things, there's fairly strict ways of you should. So the label is whatever is displayed here, like angry HD or whatever, and I'll just call that magic slider for now. If you type that into name and then hit tab, it'll populate both the name and the label. So the name is what DAZ Studio is using underneath under the hood, so that should be something very unique. I'm not sure how we deal with this in key properties, but in joint corrective morphs and morph controlled morphs, you usually preface this with MCM and then the vendor and then the product and then the actual name. So you make that very unique. So in our case, I don't really know what to call it. Maybe I'll call it KC for Keat or KP for key properties, and then maybe I'll call it J, and then I'll say magic slider, and I'll avoid spaces here, just so that you know what that is. If you're testing around, it's not a problem, but if you ever were to release this, make sure the name is something very unique so that it can't conflict with something that another vendor might have released. So we have the same thing with WordPress plugins. If you have a function that's called the same as something that another person may have created, then two functions that are called something that are the same, might just confuse the program underneath it. So make sure it's kind of unique if you distribute it. If you're playing around, no problem. Everything else we can just go leave as it is. There's one property at the bottom here that says the minimum value is set to -1. I'll set that to 0 because that's, I don't want this to go into the negative area. There's also the path here. That is also important. This is where this thing is actually going to show up. So I want to put this under my pose controls, but in the very top directory. So on the top pose controls. If I wanted to, and I'd like for this to be in my own folder, I can just go and put a / in here, say pose controls /J. That might do that. Let's go and create a new folder here into which the slider then goes. That's really that. So I'm going to go and also tick this box at the bottom here. That's called create as empty morph. And then I'll go and create it. It looks like everything is gone, but of course it isn't really. It's in pose controls. Under J, there's my magic slider. I have to, because I'm still in edit mode, I have to double click into it so that the slider does something. But currently it doesn't do anything, so I need to give it some functionality. So I think the way this works is if in edit mode, I crank this up to 100%. I think this is how it works. Do forgive me if it doesn't. It's just very, very new to me. Yes, it is such a handy tab, Biscuits, absolutely. And now comes kind of the crazy part. So with it in edit mode, with it dialed up to 100%, go and right click on that slider and find this magic property here, which is called ERC freeze. I think Brian was saying earlier on my Patreon post where I made that, where I told you all about that discovery. He says it seems that whenever the cool stuff is happening, ERC freeze is involved, and it does just so much good stuff. So ERC freeze is a function, if I understand it correctly, that will, a bit like the timeline, magically calculate interpolations and interpolated values of things. So you use ERC freeze if you have a custom character and the skeleton isn't quite in the same position as the custom character. That's when you'd use ERC freeze with the skeleton in the correct place. So it will say something to DAZ Studio along the lines of, hey, when this slider is dialed up to 100%, then all these positions are correct. So if ever the slider gets dialed down to something else, please make sure that the values are interpolated correctly, all the values that are associated with this ERC freeze that are kind of back calculated to whatever the slider position is. So if you have something that makes something big and small, it would have to calculate between the big and small according to that slider. But it also works with multiple other properties. So you had like 20 properties that have changed to make this one slider happen. ERC freeze would tell DAZ Studio, hey, calculate all 20 as the user modifies the slider. So it's super, super powerful. So I'll go and I'll click it, and another scary window comes up that says, my property. That's the crazy name that I've given it, and looks like I don't really see anything in here. It would show there would be multiple values here if you had other values controlling things. We don't have that, but what we have is this here, keyed extract from play range, and as soon as I click that, I get all these deltas that are being moved on the timeline. And keyed means that this ERC freeze is now going to look at my timeline and say, hey, whatever happens in the play range, which is in my case 30 frames, it could be much longer than that, it could be much shorter than that. Just grab all these properties and populate them all along the space of the slider, so to say. That is all I need to do. If I hit accept, then my keyframes on the timeline have disappeared. My slider is still at 100%. That's cool. I can take this out of edit mode now with right click. And then I think as I move my slider, all these expressions are essentially locked in on the slider in each and every percentage. Is that cool or what? That is just absolutely magical. So if I had like my 20 favorite expressions, even something that I've made with Puppeteer, that I've cobbled together with Puppeteer, like my perfect 20 expressions that I like my characters to have at all times, rather than having to find those exact spots on Puppeteer, I can just go and create keyframes on the timeline from that, put them all on one slider and save this slider with the figure, because this is now just a regular morph. So once you've made all that hard work and you think, oh, this is actually super handy on every of my forthcoming characters of this generation, you can just go and save this out with File, Save As, Support Asset, Morph Asset. So this is something, it's just like a regular morph that you save out now. So on this gives you another massive long list of things. So in it was in Genesis 8 pose controls. In my case it was under J, and in my case it was just the magic slider. So I just go and tick this and save that out and give it the correct library where I want to save this. Probably not your main library. You probably want to split this out into a separate library, especially if you want to distribute this. Fill out your vendor name and your product name. This denotes where in the data folder of this asset directory this is going to go. Very, very cool. Isn't that amazing? I find that absolutely amazing, because it's just another trick that if you use that, it just makes your life so much easier if you cranking out a lot of renders for comic book and visual novel production. Good stuff, isn't it, Chris? And of course it means you can morph your figure in any which way. Like if you had something, let me show you another variation of the same theme here. If I have an Annie block that is essentially an animation of the guy getting up or down or about to be sitting in a chair, it's kind of difficult to extract those from animations. So let me see if I can find something like that. Probably just in the regular Annie blocks. No, that's not it. Is it maybe in Animate? Is that where that is? No, that's also not where that is. Walk construction kit. Oh, there we go. Ups and downs. Is that something that'll work? Oh no, that's not for the right figure, is it? There we go. That's a good option here. Jump really for the Genesis 8 female. But that's okay. I mean, if you want to portray a figure in mid-jump, so you go and drag this Annie block onto the Annie timeline here, and it'll do its thing. What we need is to put this onto the regular timeline. So there's an option here under just right click and choose bake to studio keyframes. That'll turn all these, anything that's contained in any of your Annie blocks, that'll bake that onto the regular timeline. Just say yes. And then we have a ton of keyframes here. Now we have a play range of 65. And say you wanted to portray a figure in mid-jump over the course of 3 or 4 still images. It would be really handy to extract those poses from here. While you can do that, you can just use the ERC freeze in the exact same way. So now that we have the keyframes, I'll put this whole area back into edit mode, and I'll go and right click and create myself a new property. And I'll just call that jump, baby. And I can make the name uniquer. I'm going to leave it as it is for now, just to show you the principle again. I'll go and put the minimum to 0, just so that the slider doesn't go into the negative, because that's just going to be screwy as hell. I'll go and create this as a new empty morph, create my property. There we go. Double click, crank it up to 100%. And at that point, at 100%, I'd like for this to ERC free. So not at 0%. Not at 50%, not at some other value. It has to be at 100%. Right click the slider and hit for ERC freeze. And it has already done, it has a lot of values in here already. I'm going to click the keyed extract from play range because that's what I want. Then the values will change. Hit accept. All the keyframes will disappear. And this will now make my guy, woohoo, jump. But now you can use the timeline for something else. So you can now position your guy at some point in the whole sequence, then go and use D-Force, because that's not going to change this value, but it might play with the timeline. You can do something else with the timeline. So use it to rotate your camera around this guy in mid-jump, like they did in the Matrix. With how many cameras were that? Like 120 cameras or something around a center. And that's how they could literally, on 35mm film, mind you, freeze the guy in mid-jump and then move the camera around. It was literally doing that, rolling 120 cameras or however many cameras it was at the same time, playing one scene in real life footage in the middle, and then freezing it and just changing from one camera to another at the same frame. So you can do all that. And yes, that's the magic of keyed properties. When I discovered that, I was thinking, my goodness, the possibilities. And also, it doesn't seem to care how many frames were on your timeline. So the first one had 30, and that is still, whoops, I need to take this out of edit mode here so that they are functioning. That works perfectly fine with 30, but this slider has been interpolated over 65, and it also worked well. So very, very cool, isn't it? Joseph, absolutely. That is a very, very cool trick. I thought so too. I thought I'd share it with you because I was really excited when I found it. It glues properties together. I think that is exactly what, yeah, that's a very good description for that, Biscuits, absolutely. Hangry, exactly. Hangry is a good, that's a good slider to make, the hangry slider. Yes, and you can of course use them both together. Like he looks a bit hangry now. That's cool. And then he jumps and woohoo, jumps and is hangry. Yes, so much cool stuff that you can do. Well, that was it. I think that was that it? Do we have any other questions? Oh, bokeh. Oh my goodness. Yes, bokeh. My goodness. Let me show you bokeh. That is another very, very cool thing we can do. I might, shall I use him for this? I can use him for the bokeh. Since we've already made the magic slider here, we can give him a crazy expression and make him jump. That's fine. All on one page, on one. Yeah, let's do that. Let's give him, let's use him to do the bokeh. So bokeh, I don't know if you're familiar with that terminology. It's those fuzzy little out of focus dots that you see sometimes in the background, sometimes in the foreground of certain things. If you animate them, they look really cool. And it's something that we can easily do in Photoshop, like as a post-production effect. But we don't have to. We can use it in DAZ Studio and natively render it out and just use depth of field to create the same effect. Very, very cool idea to do that. Let me use him as a I mean, it's not great, but maybe we'll just give him some kind of bokeh effect when we frame him up. So let's go and save my scene here. I'll do that first. That directory is getting rather large of DAZ projects here. I'll call it bokeh. This is how you spell it. Some people also call it bokeh or something else. I don't really know what it's pronounced as, but I'll call this scene Jump Guy V1. And I'll go, I don't need the timeline for this, so I'll go and close that down and create myself a new camera. Maybe just showing him like that, like he's a superhero and he's in the middle of jumping here. Create a new camera, copy the active viewport, change over to that camera, show my aspect frame. So I'll go and have him, I'll just zoom into him like that, but I don't want to do it by being too close to him with the camera. I want to have the camera slightly further away from him and go and turn that focal length into something like 200. So the more I do that, the more it'll be, the more the depth of field will take. This is something that's I don't think this is a great pose, but you get the picture as soon as we see him. So maybe this is our framing. Let's do that. This is our magically framed up camera now. That's nice. And I'll go back to my perspective view. So this is important to know. I'm going to shoot him slightly from the bottom here, which means that my bokeh particles, they need to appear kind of behind him here, so that he's in focus, but anything that's over here will be out of focus. So yes, that's kind of the magic. And I'll do that with Howie Fark's super amazing Ultra Scatter add-on, because that is the one thing that'll make me these particles. So you can do the same in Blender or with any other things, and I'm not going to use any other tools for this, just all in DAZ Studio. So the bokeh particles, they're tiny little flakes that are randomly distributed and just presented out of focus at the back. Thank you, Julia. Very nice. So for that, we need to, first of all, make ourselves a particle. Let me go and switch that aspect frame off again. Keep these guys where they are. I'll go and save my scene, and I'll go and create myself a new primitive. And that's just going to be a plane, which will be my particle. It's going to be super nice and tiny, so this is just going to be 0.01 meters. I suppose centimeters is probably a better way to describe that. It's going to be 1 centimeter. One centimeter, that's it. And it's just going to be square. So I'll call that particle, just so that I remember what that is. There's a camera clipping issue. If you go too close to it, you barely see it's a square. So I have to be kind of here. It'll be fine the way it is. Whoops. It'll be fine the way it is, but it'll be even better if we make it not square, if we just turn it into a bit of a rounded thing. And the easiest way to make that happen in DAZ Studio is to apply a subdivision surface modifier. So let's go over to create. No, not actually create, it's edit, object, geometry. Since you don't really go into these menus very often, convert to sub D, and that applies what Blender knows as a subdivision surface modifier. And when we do that, we can see that my little plane has been turned into kind of a more rounded palette thing, and that's better. That's better for us to use. This is the same thing that I was talking about earlier with the. And that's the crab again. Very nice. This is the same thing I was talking about earlier with this little icon from the scene tools set. If I click that, it'll turn this into low resolution as well. So if I don't do that, it'll turn my figure into low res, but it's also essentially on the thing that I've just created, it'll just switch the subdivision surface modifier off and turn it into base resolution. And if I switch this back over, then it'll turn back into high resolution. So that's where that is. And this is where that's happened. So under mesh resolution, this option here, we didn't have that before. I applied the subdivision surface modifier. And if I switch this back to base, the thing is going to be a square again. And if I turn this back into high res, it'll be this again. I like it to be kind of a rounded palette. And this is going to be the one particle that we're going to go and replicate many times over in the background of our figure. So let's go and make ourselves another primitive that will be behind my figure, and that's the one into which we're going to replicate all these particles. So head over to create new primitive, make it a cube this time. It could be anything, but a cube is probably the simplest thing to grasp. I will make that 1 meter with 1 division, so nice and plain and simple. We can always scale it up. There it is. It's going to be an invisible object, by the way. I put that back here, and just so that it's in the camera as well, I might go and make that bigger as well. It doesn't, the color of the cube doesn't really matter. We're not going to see it. We're just going to use it as a container, really, to have something happening inside it. So I'll put this cube up so that when I look through my camera, basically the cube is behind this, filling out the picture here. It might actually be a little bit too big, so I probably get away with making that cube smaller. We can play with this later. That's quite nice too. Yeah, so now I need to move my guy, I suppose, over, is it in the X? Yeah, there we go. So it's just making sure that the whole cube and nothing but the cube is kind of behind him, like so. And it'll become clear why I'm doing that in a minute. So this looks ugly and it's not great, but the moment we go and, well, rename that first, and I'll call this guy volume. The moment I add my particles into it, that's where the fun is really going to begin. So go and select the particle in the scene tab, and then head over and go open that ultra scatter magic script. I think it's under utilities, is it? Is it somewhere down here? Yes, ultra scatter, that's the one. I'm using the pro version. Grab helper product. Gavin, no, I haven't actually. There's one, I know, the mesh grabber. That's nice. That's a cool one. That it saves you some round trips into 3D applications. But it's also if you really want to only stay in DAZ Studio, then that's valuable. But I prefer to just go and take the geometry out and do the changes in another 3D editor like Blender or ZBrush. But I do understand that's not everyone's cup of tea. So Mesh Grabber does have does have great uses. It's like your Swiss Army knife to fixing clothing that doesn't quite behave, that doesn't have the morphs that you want. So much better than deformers, I find. So yeah, that does have value if that is the one that you mean. Let's go, and with the particle selected, double click Ultra Scatter, and I have the Pro version, which has support for volumes and for matrices. So this one that we can't see, that is just called surfaces. And I think there's two versions of Ultra Scatter around this: Ultra Scatter Advanced and Pro. And Advanced will work if you want to use the same effect with a plane, you can do that. But I prefer to do this with a volume. At the moment I click volume, it just goes and disappears here. So this is our scatter object, the particle, and we're going to select the target node now into which the thing is going to be replicated via the magic of instances, and this plugin takes care of it all for us. So select my volume as the target. So the object you select in the scene tab is the one that is the scatter object, and the one we want to put it into is the target object. So in my case, it's the volume. The number of instances / iterations, let's make it 1,000, just for kicks. And the distribution and the scaling, I'm going to leave alone for now. We're going to mess with that. You can make them bigger and smaller. You can do the rotation. Actually, rotation I will work with, because it's a flat plane. I don't want it to be replicated as is everywhere. I want this to be turned in all 3 axes in total random values. So I'll go and crank X, Y, and Z up to 180, all of them. And that's really all I need to do. I could go with the scaling and the distribution. I'll do that maybe in a moment. I'll go and just hit volume scatter and let Ultra Scatter do its thing. Thank you, Brian. Yes, very nice. See if you can pin that message now, Brian. If you click this little 3 dots icon, I believe that pins the message at the top of the chat. Let's see if it works. Okay, so that has now, oh yeah, there's one other thing that's happened, and I didn't quite talk about it. The target volume has been hidden, and that has happened because when I did this, double click the Ultra Scatter, there was this option that was enabled, hide the target. So it'll automatically make that cube invisible that we view. So I didn't actually speak about this. And my values are still intact because I was on the Ultra Scatter particle group here. So there we go. So that's now invisible. It's kind of what we want. And what we currently can't see is the particles themselves. That's only because they're very tiny, but there's definitely 1,000 in there. So if I go and zoom in, I can see the effect. It looks like cosmic dust. And also, as you move closer, you can see that they're all turned any which way, and that's really what I was after. So that's all my dust in the background now. So now if I go to my camera, I can see all these specks of dust in the background. So that's kind of cool. Let me go and save all this out, just so that in case things happen that we don't really want them to happen. Jump Guy V2. Now with particles. Let's see what that looks like rendered in Iray. Keeping in mind I only have the default HDRI active right now, so the lighting isn't going to be great. So we're going to fix that in a moment. But yes, this is what I can see. I can see all kinds of particles in the background here. That looks already very cool. So if you're building a space scene, this would be a great way to denote, hey, there's more than one planet out there. Or grasp helper. Okay. No, I don't know that. Very interesting. I'm going to have a look into that. Thank you, Gavin. Thank you for the tip. Oh, you can only remove it but not pin it. Ah, I wonder if they haven't released it to everyone yet. I may have to make you a manager on my channel. I've done it now, and it should pop up like as a blue thing. Ultra Scatter is. I think it would be a good way to use this, because then it's the thing we're currently talking about, and then we can just pin that for a moment, and then move on to something else. I think that's good. Ultra Scatter, yes, Brian, look at that. And you say you can remove it, but you can't pin it yourself, right? Interesting. YouTube coming out with so many exciting new features. So for this to really become bokeh, they need to be out of focus here rather than just be crisp and sharp. And to do that, I'll go switch over to filament. I'll go to my top viewport, where I'll choose my camera, and under the parameters tab or on the cameras tab, whichever way you want to work with, I'll turn on depth of field, and that'll give me some additional lines here. That's this little bit that just appeared here, just right about where he is. As I switch on depth of field, I get this little box here, and that is now movable either with this little ball here or with the focal length parameter. So as I do that, whoops, not the focal length, sorry, it's the focal distance parameter. If I move that, I can pick out what part of my scene I'd like to be in absolute focus. So I'm going to go and put this on his eyes here, maybe like so. And I'll leave the f-stop at 22. Lower values will increase the depth of field, higher values will decrease the depth of field. So as I do that, these two planes, they go move and move out from one another or move further into one another. So we get more or less. So as I increase that, this is going to be a bigger depth of field, whereas this is a smaller depth of field. And that's kind of what I want. So back on the camera, if I go and render this now in Iray, we should see lots of fluffy particles. It looks like the depth of field is so shallow that all my particles seem to either disintegrate or not really show up. So I'll go and make my depth of field a bit bigger, and you can see that they are still trying to render. They're not very big, and they're also not very pronounced. But we can see that we're kind of getting into this bokeh direction. I actually think it'll look really good with a shallower depth of field and perhaps with slightly larger particles. So let me go and see if I can make that happen. There's another thing that you can do. You can make the particles, and maybe I'll use 100 just for now. You can pick the particle and give the particle an emission channel. That could be very cool. So anything other than, currently they don't emit any light, and they don't have to. I should really just be able to hit them with a light and shine a light through them. But let's just see what happens if I go and make them slightly yellow and emit light. You can see that they do show up more. Two-sided light is on, but we don't really see them because nothing's really hitting them. So we want to really have a little contrast that kind of hits them from angles and makes them show up. So let's make that happen. I might actually go and turn my window into 2 viewports so that I can keep an eye on this while meddling with that in the perspective view. So this guy, he needs a bit of light anyway, so we'll deal with him later. Let's make the bokeh show up first of all. We want the bokeh to show on camera, so I'm going to give it one light from here, one spotlight. Create spotlight, there we go. From active viewport, transform this. And with the spotlight, so this is I'm going to call this the bokeh light. And on the parameters tab under constraints, I want to make that point at our volume so that it goes and just always points at the volume here. And that's quite nice. Points at the volume from a funky angle. So now we need the correct light value. I don't really know what that might be, but I'll turn it to 100,000 for now. See what that does. Certainly makes the bokeh particles show up a little bit, but not quite enough. Let's increase it. It's getting there, but it's still not really doing it for me. So I'll increase it by 10 every time, and now I can see the particles coming out here. That's quite nice. So that's, you know, bokeh happening there. Hello, Mr. Rel. No problem. Always good to have you. It doesn't matter how early or how late you show up. Always nice to have you. If you're into Marvelous Designer or Claw or any kind of fashion development, Dorel is your woman. Type !Dorel in the chat and you'll get a link to her channel. I don't know if you're streaming today or are you streaming next month? I think you took a little break there. But it's always good to see you. So hey, that's bokeh. That's the beginnings of bokeh here. And I think this bokeh light is nice. We're going to go and leave it as it is. I'll go and increase my depth of field a little bit, because that will make these particles just more out of focus. And I'll do that by selecting the camera. On the camera parameters, I'll go and turn the f-stop right down. So I have a feeling that maybe the default of 20 was probably not such a bad idea. Maybe 50. 50 that's good for now. And you can see all these bokeh particles showing up. If they're not big enough for us, we can just make them a little bit larger. So if you want larger bokeh, then that's really not that big an issue with ultra scatter. You can just go and change the parameters. So let's see, I'll leave iRay enabled. I don't know if that's a good idea. I'd select my particle first of all. Particle is so small. Come on, buddy, where are you? There we go. That's the particle, super tiny. I'll go and make him just a bit larger. So I think I'll make him maybe like just to emphasize the whole process. I'm going to make him 400% now. And does this automatically reflect all the other instances as I make this guy larger? Yes, it does, doesn't it? Yeah, look at that. The bokeh particles are turning larger. That's quite nice, because that's how instances work. When you modify the source object, all the others essentially follow. So I'll make him 10 times larger. Then, oops, that was so I'll make him 10,000%. Do the bokeh particles really do that? Or do they not? I can't tell. If they don't, I'm not sure if they do. We go and click ultra scatter again, and go and have ultra scatter scatter the whole thing again now with larger particles. So I have a feeling this is probably too large. Oop. Does not obey my commands anymore. I'll make this maybe 5,000 times bigger than it was before, so like that. And then I go select the ultra scatter volume here, or the ultra scatter group rather, double click ultra scatter again, and just have it scatter the whole thing again. I might also add a bit of random scaling. So we've got the random rotation, but not the scaling. So for that, I say make it a little smaller as well as larger, and add the variance to 100%. And now volume scatter this again. Give it a moment. See what happens. Yes, of course you still pause. I know, Durrell, absolutely. You know, I totally agree. It takes so much time to record tutorials, to make content. It does take a lot of time. I'm trying this new thing out here. This is kind of new for me in regards to doing a stream and using that as what's it called? Videos that will be split out into individual videos, because I feel it's just so much nicer to create content together with you guys than it is to do this on my own. I really feel there's a very different energy to it, and it's nice to be able to react to questions immediately. And yeah, for me, this is I'm trying this out. I hope this is going to work. If you guys like it, I like it. I still like playing video games, but I also like to shake things up a bit. So as I said earlier, the whole series about animating my exciting toon crab is coming to YouTube very soon. Let's make it 500 instead. So it looks like I have to do this. I have to change the particle, and then I go over back to ultra scatter, double click this, and then just go and scatter the whole thing again. And that will, it looks like that, only that will change the size of the particles, not just changing the particle itself. It looks like it. Yeah, there we go, perfect. So these are now getting much bigger, and this is kind of more the effect that I wanted. It's also not quite the size I wanted, so I think 500 is still way too large. So maybe we'll make it 250, and then ultra scatter that again. Volume scatter, I like it. Yes, me too, Durrell. I like that workflow. I've noticed this first on Twitch videos that where I just wanted to do something, and it was fun to do it. If it goes wrong, it goes wrong. If it doesn't go wrong, it turns into a tutorial. I think that's a great way of doing that. I've noticed that on how Twitch works. So they make it really easy to create snippets out of a long stream and then push them to YouTube right away. So it's very, very nice. We're nearly there with our bokeh, so I'll go and make my depth of field much lower, so that'll create that exciting effect then in the back there. So on my camera, on my parameters tab, often I have the camera tab split out because it just gives me one easy access point to those settings. Yeah, so this is kind of a nice bokeh. I'm thinking this is kind of nice. And this is the effect I was going to show you. They're a little bit brighter than him, so he isn't lit yet, so he needs a bit of light, but we can make that happen. We give him one light from here, so we get a bit of separation on here. This has already been taken care of to a certain extent with the bokeh light, so I can see that already. He just needs a little bit of fill-in from the front, maybe from the side actually. If I go onto my environments tab here and drop that down to 0.3, that illuminates his face here a little bit, and I'll just give him one side light from here. I think I might do that. I'm also inclined to make the depth of field even smaller, so let's call it no, 1 is that's a bit much, isn't it? I was going to say 12 or 8 or 16. Let's stick with photography terms. 16 is good. You can also change the color of the bokeh particles. That's also possible. You can create yourself 3 or 4 particles that each have a different color, and then let Ultrascatter replicate all of those as a group, and then there's kind of a different type of color randomly in the background. It's also a great idea. I'll let you work that one out, just so that we have a tiny bit of color here. Currently, this is the base color. We also have that emission shader that I don't know if we need that. Now that we have the light, let's switch that off. That makes it a bit darker already. And let's give it, I don't know, maybe red. Is red good? And look at that. That's kind of nice. That's already very cool. Let's give him some handsome. We've got that separation going here already. I don't really need to worry about that. I'll give him one light from the side, and then, you know, our man is ready for render. My goodness, keyed properties and all. That is very, very cool. Yeah, so from here it'll be kind of from here. Let's try that. Create new spotlight. Active viewport transforms, yes. And I'll call this one the key light. And then with the key light, I'll go and head over the constraints, and I'll point this literally at his face here. So hip, lower, upper, chest, upper, chest, lower, chest, upper is a good idea. Point that here. And then it also means I can go and move the light around. So it's probably a little bit too high. I'm thinking it hasn't got any values yet. I'll just go give it some, give it a bit of a default value here, maybe 50,000. And I'm thinking yeah, that's getting there. I like it. Maybe just a little more. Let's say 80,000, and we'll make and we'll get rid of the harshness of the shadow here by turning the light geometry from point light into a disk, and then make the disk a little larger, maybe like 50 and 50. That's a bit less dramatic, but we still retain that there's kind of a dramatic shadow edge to him. I like that. And then the position of the light, yeah, I'd like to maybe just put that slightly down. I mean, I do like the way half of his face is bathed in shadows, and he's kind of, you know, he's all whatever he's doing, opening a rift to another dimension or whatever. I'm happy either way. I just want to try out what happens when we put the light a little lower. Yeah, I think I like that a bit better. I like to see this is kind of the comic type shadow, but I was also concerned about about illuminating more of his right side. And you know, speaking of which, maybe I'll go and turn down the environment light even more. That'll emphasize that. But I'm thinking just a little bit of illumination, 0.2 on the environment, that might really do it. And also, I don't really mind having the key light a bit brighter still. Not so bad for something we've cobbled together in a couple of in like 20 minutes or so. I like that. The BTS team, I like it. Yes, I like it. So that's how you can make bokeh, and I'm really I'm chuffed to having discovered this morning. I haven't discovered it this morning, but I was thinking maybe it's something that that should be possible. So literally 20 minutes before we went on air, I thought, oh, this would be a nice thing to show. So yeah, I thought this is kind of nice. This is how you make bokeh. One volume, and it's kind of funny when you see this volume from here. You just see this cube that has all these little bokeh particles in here. It takes a little bit of time to play around finding the correct size as well as the light direction. But all I did here really was, just to recap this, we have one light that is shining into the bokeh particles. It might actually, let me just play with that a bit. This is that. I think it may have be maybe a little bit too far away. I'm going to go and save it before I make any rash changes here. Call this the Jump Guy version 3. And I'll just go and move the bokeh light slightly further, closer to the bokeh, and see what the effect is. So it gets a little bit lighter. But do I like it? I think I just liked it just fine the way it was. Maybe we'll give the guy some clothing and turn him into a real character. And also thanks to our own pose control slider, my goodness, we can go and change the expression into anything we want on a single slider. Oh my. And you could imagine multiple sliders. One of them would be the seam slider, and one of them would be an expression slider. You could have one happy slider and one sad slider, and you can have one exciting slider where you have your favorite like 7 expressions that are all excitement. You just dial them with a single slider. It's just absolutely funky, isn't it? So this is him being happy, and this is him being not so happy, and you have that on a single slider. And so you can tell the story and just render out another picture and just make that slight change. You can even then have the jump position a little bit different, and just all on a single slider. And we've made that all ourselves. It's just kind of crazy, isn't it? Whoa. Very, very cool. You know, I like that as well. I like Julia's new avatar as well. Julia always surprises me with things that she goes and has found. The new thing is Canva. Very, very cool. Canva is something that I don't know if you've heard of it. I'll just go and save this as my new version 4. This is going to be the one I keep over saving. Canva is something that was originally, I think, sponsored in part by Guy Kawasaki, and it's something that lets you make amazing illustrations in the comfort of a web browser. And it's not something like 1995 desktop publishing, not at all. It's something very, very cool. It's about $100 a year, and you drag and drop elements into your scene that can be animated, not animated, fonts and text and little bits and pieces. They've got thousands of items of clip art, and you have all these controls that you're used to from Photoshop, you know, dim down opacity and do color correction, put shadows on. It works, and it is quite impressive. I'd like to use it more for my YouTube thumbnails. Let's give the guy some clothing. So he is a Genesis 8.0 character, so we've got to keep that in mind. Let's see what we actually have. Business suit guy jumping? I'm not sure. DeForce the Max outfit. We can do that. Let's use that. DeForce the whole Max outfit. I like it. For Genesis 8 and 8.1. So that should work. Yes, that is nice. He is the superhero that we've been waiting for. Maybe his hat will just go and float off. I like that. Hat, can we do? Since he is already in motion. And for that to work, I think the world coordinates are probably easier if I wanted to move that guy up and at him. Nice, I like it. He's losing his hat. Since we have so much room over here, we might as well make use of it. Well, we'll see what we do about the position of his hat here. Oops. There, so that's the hat floating about because he's, you know, in mid-air. I think this is it D-Force? I think this might be a D-Force outfit as well. So we can D-Force that in a sec. I think we'll figure it out. Let's give it an actual character now. Under figures, what have we got to offer here? Edward, Floyd. It could be Floyd. Ah. Any preference? It could be Hitoshi Sensei. Oh, maybe it's him. What do you think? Let's make it him. Or Toon Dad. That's a good superhero. Or Toon Dwayne. That's a good superhero too. They're all good choices. Let's try them all. Let's try Hitoshi Sensei with this outfit. He's kind of a guy that let's put all morphs and materials. Yes, replace my gray guy into an actual good-looking figure. Hitoshi Sensei. Oh, he's changed positions. That's unexpected. So that means we might have to just put him back into a different frame here. That's probably easiest on the just with Y translate to put him back in the frame. Hitoshi. Yes, Canva, absolutely beautiful. And you get a free, so you have a free account. You can use the free account for as long as you like. And then the pro account just has more clip art bits and pieces. Hitoshi, and also how's that expression going here? In the J folder. We may need different expressions for him. I just love this idea to just have poses as well as expressions on a single slider. It's something very new to me that I haven't really investigated much yet. But maybe he's intense. He's intense. There, very intense. Let's save that and see what that looks like. Easy to swap out. In fact, let's give us a proper render rather than just a preview render. Why should we just go? We just do this. That's nice. See what he looks like. Golem goes bokeh. That's exactly right. Yes. Yeah. So now that I see it in large, I think the depth of field is actually either not at exactly the correct spot, so I can see that his face is still a little bit out of focus, or we have a little bit too much of it. So we can just try and make that a little bit. Do both of these things, shift it around and make it a little bit less. I think that'll be beneficial. Let's do that from the top view with our camera selected. Camera here, there we go. Parameters, camera, depth of field. So I'm going to bring it back to 22, but also I'll have a look at the focal distance. Yeah, so there we go. I want to make sure the eyes are definitely in on this line here, on this red line, ideally. And these two front and back positions, they should be where I want the depth of field. So that might yield better results. Let's see what it looks like. Yeah, I don't mind his clothing to be slightly out of focus. I like that effect, but I really like to have he needs to be in an absolute pristine sharp focus, and I think with the real render we'll probably see that. Let's go D-Force clothing and do a real render then. I think it's a D-Force outfit. I'm not entirely sure if it is, but why don't we just try it out? Save before we do anything D-Force. Let's see if it is. Just hit the simulate button. That should, oh yeah, look, something's happening. I hope this is not going to be on the hat. I'm hoping that the hat isn't D-Force. That is just a coat. Let's see. We may have to fix some poke through. I'm not sure about the shoulder approach there. We'll see what happens. Mr. Nate! Top of the morning, sir. How are you today? Nate's joining us from Canada. It's earlier in Canada, so he's still waking up. Give the coffee a few minutes to kick in. I thought I'd do some 3D stuff today. My original plan was to use this time to do a little bit of 3D stuff and to play a little bit of Subnautica, but it looks like we're already pretty well on the 3D train, so I'll just keep going with this, and we'll see if we can turn this into a good-looking render that I'll put on my DAZ gallery so you can have a look at it. Might take like 10-15 minutes to render in with good iterations, but I'll put it on there. And then tomorrow we're going to go back underneath the surface and play a bit of Subnautica. That's the plan. And I do need to, I'm so confused that you're a moderator on the DAZ channel but not on my channel. I need to make you a moderator here as well. And Brian, also I'd like to see if it makes a difference if I make you, instead of a moderator, if I make you this other thing, what's it called, a manager on my channel. Maybe that will let you pin messages, because I think that'll be a valuable feature. Aha, Hitoshi, good D-Force outfit. Hat is still looking fine. I think there is a little bit of poke through we need to talk about, namely here. But this is great to show you actually how I would fix this. There's something at the back here as well, but it's not going to be framed up, so I don't think I need to fix it. But those parts on the shoulder here, I need to do that. So two ways in which you can do it. You can see if the clothing has morphs that will make that possible. I don't know if it has. Let me go and bring in a filament draw options node quickly. I will use it to crank up the way the current environment intensity is interpolated, and when I do that, it'll make the picture appear brighter. So it was already pretty bright before I put the filament draw options node in, but then I've turned down the intensity of the HDRI in the render settings tab, and that now makes the filament draw options node look at that lesser intensity, hence my picture is darker. But if I want to go and fix these things, it's actually easier for me if I can go and see this a bit better. So let's see what morphs we have, and if we don't have morphs, I'll show you how to do this with the geometry editor and just hide these surfaces underneath here. But let's see if we can have an easy option that just makes this bulge out a bit. We're good. If we don't, then we'll go to plan B. So we're concerned about the jacket. This is the jacket. Let's see if we can just make that bulge out. So on the right hand side under actor shaping, that's probably where that is. Yeah, so we have a lot of options. So expand all is one that does this for everything. That's probably going to do the trick. Boom, perfect, sorted. Including the back. So that's already sorted my problem. That's perfect. So if we hadn't had that, and just remember we do have it, so we don't have to worry about it. But if we hadn't had that, let me show you how to do this with the geometry editor and fix poke through here, because that is not every item of clothing has that many morphs, and I always appreciate it when clothing creators put these in despite deforce. So it'd be very easy to think, hey, deforce will sort it out, I don't have to worry about it. No, it's not the case. Even after the deforce simulation, sometimes you run into problems like this. So let's try this, try to make that happen. I have it up here. This is the tool you need, the geometry editor tool. It's also up under window panes. I'm so sorry, tools, geometry editor. And you also need the tool settings for that, which is under the window panes tool settings tab. So let's go and switch over to that. You see my manipulator has gone away. I'll switch over to my tool settings, in which I can see all these groups here. And that's really scary when you see this for the first time, because you think, oh, what is all this? It's just the figure that's selected that shows you what its geometry groups are. So you can hide them here if you like, but I don't want to do that. The surfaces are also nameable. If you want to see what's what here, you can select or deselect these things. You can hide these things if you want to do that. So it gives you a bit of variety here. This is basically the hard work that clothing creators put in to split up their clothing under the hood. Then we have the regions here. We don't really worry about that. We're worried about selection sets, and this is kind of something that lets you save a group that you create and that we have to create now. And really, we don't have to create them on the jacket at all. The jacket is fine the way it is. What we need is the item of clothing underneath the jacket. And that is, of course, in our case, the shirt. So let's select the shirt. And when I do that, the geometry selection will also change over here. And now I've got this little brush here. There's that little red dot. And its selection radius can be set up here. So if I go and turn that into something larger, like maybe 30. 30 is probably good. You see a much larger circle here, and that's nice. Notice that as I move in and out of the figure, the circle will always stay the same size. So that's a kind of a quick way to change its size. If you needed to select a larger area, you would just zoom out of the figure, and because the circle is the same size, it now selects a larger area. I'm only going to fix whatever is broken, namely this here. So left click and drag, and it'll select everything that pokes through my jacket. So either or. I'll go and hold Control down to select more than one group. And I think there's also this here. So still holding down Control will add this also to my selection. So I've got these three parts of the shirt selected, not the jacket, of the shirt. And with that, I'll come over here to selection sets, right click selection sets, and say create selection set from selected. I'd say that 10 times fast. Create selection set from selected. You click it and then you give it a name, and I'll say this is the shirt poke. And that creates a group for me that will be saved with my scene as I do that. And the beauty of this group is now I can go and click this little eyeball icon, and that will make what I've selected invisible. And that means the poke through has been eliminated. And that's very nice. Sometimes you run into the problem that if you fix one thing, like especially in layered types of clothing, you may now run into the problem that the underlying figure, like the character, is also poking through at that point, so that you'd have to go and do the same thing on the character. Thankfully we don't, but yeah, this is our handiwork. If I go and make the jacket invisible now, I can see that I can see Hitoshi Sensei underneath here, so that's a possibility. There's other ways of doing it, but the geometry editor is a really nice, helpful way of fixing a quick poke through. And if you had other items in a particular pose that you see now, you can go and just add more selection sets, like shirt poke at the top, shirt poke at the bottom, or whatnot. So this, yeah, this is an easy way to do it. I'll give you your jacket back, Hitoshi, and I'll switch back over to my 3D manipulator tool, my universal manipulator, And since we have no more poke through, let's go and render this guy out for real. And in fact, also, let's go and save him out. So the selection sets are saved with the figure that you save, or with the scene as you save it. But what happens is that next time you load in the scene, you have to go and just make those invisible again. So the selection sets remain, but its visibility status does not. Just something to be aware of. If you load the scene again, you think, haven't I just fixed that? You just have to go back into the tool settings with the geometry editor and just make that invisible again. Alrighty, progressive render. Rendering quality, no. Max samples, yes. 500. 200 is probably enough for us for now. Scene size, let's make it 1920 by 1080. I'll do a 4K render later with like 5,000 iterations or so. Post denoiser, yes. Post denoiser enable, yes. And Hitoshi, come on. Show us the good stuff. I have a new power supply for my computer, by the way, which hopefully sustains long rendering times with my two RTX cards. Let's see if it works. Look at that. Bokeh is happening nicely at the back, and it was fast. That was 200 iterations. That was fast. That is nice. Since it was so fast, let's go and make one with many more iterations. I didn't know it was going to be that fast. I'm always surprised these days. Let's make it maybe 2,500 for now. Is that something we can do? Let's do it. That was fast. My God. The longer you let it render, no matter if you have the denoiser enabled or not, the longer you let it render, the better the picture is going to look. So if you find that after 200 or 500 iterations, you think, the skin's a little waxy, I'm missing some detail here, I don't think this is going to look as good as some of the renders I've seen, let it render. Just put more iterations into the mix, and it'll look great. Making the picture larger on the render doesn't actually increase render time all that much, interestingly. So a 4K versus a 1K picture doesn't take 4 times longer to render, interestingly. It takes a little longer, but not 4 times longer, even though it's 4 times the size. It's kind of interesting. Fascinating. I always find that fascinating. What's the logic behind that? I don't understand it. I just acknowledge it. And so everything that looks like a square here, that's transparent, and I'm going to go and fill that in Photoshop with something, nice and exciting. We could use a set for that, but I think, just give it a plain background color, like the blue that would match his shirt would be an idea. Or you can make it something like a fiery red, or like something kind of like a purple thing, because obviously Hitoshi's just opened up a rift into another dimension through which we shall all travel, or closed up a rift through which, I don't know, the evil guys have come. I don't know. I really don't know. So let's call that Jump Guy V1. Actually, it's Jump Guy V4, isn't it? Save that out and let's do a bit of photoshopping. Turn that into a quality render. Brian, see if you can find him in the DAZ store. He's called the Hitoshi Sensei. He's such a cool character. He's made by, I believe, Mechazar or Joe Quick. I forgot now, but it's one of my favorite characters. I love all the wrinkles. I love how he just goes and, it's just nice. Alrighty, open that render. If I can find it. I think that was on DAZ projects, and I just put it into the renders folder. Jump Guy, there we go, Jump Guy V4. So that's just white at the back here. Let me go and add just a plain color background or a gradient. I might just go with a plain background for now. and something else. Let's go try black. Black might be nice. Let's try black. Move that underneath Hitoshi, and this is what it looks with the black background. So that's quite nice. But let's see if we can go and turn that into a different color. Say that's his shirt. That's a bit too light, so it needs to be something dark. I think maybe blue isn't actually a good color to be mixed in here at all. So I'm thinking maybe something like a dangerous dark purple, perhaps. Actually, none of the colors I like. I really like to stay with the darker color here. I'm thinking. I can't quite decide. Thank you, Brian. Absolutely, that's the one. So you can't pin him. Maybe I'll pin him. Replace pinned message. This is nice. Nate, let me know if you find that feature on your YouTube channel. It's something that's just come out this morning. So I've not seen this before. I knew I could pin merchandise, but not that. So maybe black or something like a dark gray is good. Or we just leave it on black and we'll create us, make a new layer here in between and make that into a gradient. That's also nice. If I can find it, gradient tool is here, and we're just going to put that like into here. Yeah, I think I liked it before. Something like this. If you find that's a bit too much, you just drop down the opacity, and then you get just that tiny bit of extra backlight on Hitoshi. So the gradient just looks like well, you can't actually see it. It just looks like this. But the moment we mix that into a certain percentage, it just gives that guy a little bit of extra pizzazz from the back. And then to emphasize him even more and his flying off hat, I'll go and create another layer above it and create a little vignette around him, so that I want to really draw attention to him rather than this area or that area. So I'll do that with elliptical marquee tool and make sure he's the center of attention here, like this. I think that's kind of nice. And with that, I'll go and invert the selection. And on my new layer, I'll go and use my paint bucket tool and just fill that with black. And then I don't need the selection anymore. So what I can do now is turn this layer into a smart object. Right click and convert to smart object, so that I can now go and put a filter on this, namely a blur, just a Gaussian blur. The smart filter allows me to adjust the filtered value. So I don't know how soft my vignette needs to be. So this would be too harsh. This is kind of getting there, but I think whatever I had before, like 190, that's a good value. So make it really, really soft. And much like before, we don't want this to have 100% effect. That would just make things a bit too dark. But if I drop this down to something more subtle, like 30, 40, something like that, then I've already increased my where the eye wanders. So I've dimmed this down here essentially and made sure that he is more the center of attention. So we've got this going on many levels. We make sure that he is supposed to be the lightest part of the picture, and he's going to be the sharpest part of the picture. And the vignette is just one other tool that directs the viewer into that direction. So this is without the vignette, and this is with the vignette. So you see what the difference is that makes. And then on top of that, something we haven't done yet is actually apply some basic color correction. So I think he could do with a slight contrast enhancement. So I'll go and do that just on the layer above him. I don't want to do that above the mask, above the vignette. The vignette's supposed to be as it is. So I'll go and add, there's many ways of doing it. I'll just use levels. Not levels, actually, sorry. I'm going to use brightness and contrast. I find that's the easiest. You can use auto, but that usually, Photoshop usually gets it wrong. Either makes it too much or too little. So I think I'm going to go and make him a bit stronger here. Don't want to overdo it either, but just a little contrast enhancement will actually be beneficial. And I think the last thing I'd like to do, I'll go get rid of the levels layer here. Aside from sorting my bits and pieces out here so that I'm super organized, I'll go and put this into a folder, and I'll call that the vignette. And then I can close that down. And this one is the color correction. I'll put that in a folder. And this is then the background here. Just so that next week I remember what I did there. And that I have plenty of options to change it. And then he is just you know, my main man. There we go. Under color correction, I think I wanna add something else to it, and that's just a slight color shift. So I'd like for all of this to be a bit warmer, and I think I can use a photo filter for that, or just use a color balance for that. I might just use color balance and make the midtones a bit yellower and a bit redder, because he has just opened up a rift into another dimension and all. I can also turn the highlights into something that goes a similar way, like so. Maybe that's a bit too much. Yeah, maybe the highlights were actually okay. I'll leave the highlights as they. Oh, see, now that they're turned back, they almost look too cool. It's like the fiery depths of hell have just been opened up there. This could be even more orange, make it more moody. So more yellow, more red. There we go. Oh my goodness, yes, Nate, the crab is our new friend. I think Jeremy called him Sebastian. So yeah, Sebastian is his name, and he is, I've made him on Twitch over the last 2.5 days. I think mainly 2 days animation and 1 day rendering and putting him together so that he looks handsome on the overlay. I'll see if I can do more such little animations. I think it was just a lot of fun to do. I had a blast. Let's go and save that in the same project here, which was it Bokeh, I think? Create a new folder here and call it Finals. Jump Guy V4. I'm going to go and render him out in even higher resolution with more iterations. It might not actually take that long. In something like 4K, maybe even 8K, and we can see what he's gonna look like. There was a way to make this full screen, but I forgot how that works in Photoshop. Probably under, was it under View? Probably. There we go. Fit to screen, fit on screen. That's not it. I meant something like make the guy full screen. Is it screen mode? There we go, full screen without menu bar. And it tells me press F or escape to go back. All right, Control 0 will make him all full screen. There we go. That is our handiwork for today. So many exciting tips. I hope you liked them. I hope you got a lot out of it. As I said, I'm going to turn these into shorter videos that are more specific on a per topic basis, and then I'll re-upload them to the channel in the next few days or weeks. But you know, thank you so much for hanging out with me and going through all this. I really appreciate you guys hanging out. I'd like for this to become a regular feature on a Saturday. Sometimes I might not have that many questions to answer or that much stuff to do in 3D, but I'll try to be more on Twitch for working sessions. So for stuff that I feel I want to do, and you know, you're more than welcome to join me in the afternoon on my Twitch channel for that if you like. My friends, thank you so much for hanging. I'll be back tomorrow at 10 a.m. for a good round of Subnautica. If you're interested in exciting real-time 3D graphics, join me for that. Other than that, have a wonderful weekend, and thank you so much for dropping by. Bye-bye.